West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy with Chef Justice Putnam. Netrootsradio.com.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théières, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ma fleur sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte.
We can move forward as a country and embrace the notion that we're all going to be judged not on the color of our skin, but on the content of our character, and in this case, on our GPA.
Am I understanding you saying there in that answer that you do not believe there is racial inequity in the education system in America?
I really don't believe there is. I believe there was. I mean, there may have been a time when affirmative action was necessary, simply to open the doors of all of our schools and universities. But I think that time has passed, and we'll continue to move forward as a colorblind society.
A colorblind society. That concept was the central struggle of the Supreme Court's decision to strike down race-conscious admission policies last week. Now, on the campaign trail and elsewhere, the takeaway seems to be we have achieved some kind of colorblind nirvana, that race-conscious solutions to systemic social inequities actually disenfranchise white people. So we should be race-neutral or colorblind, like presidential candidate Mike Pence suggests. To bolster this argument in the court's majority opinion last week, Chief Justice John Roberts cited Jim Crow-era Justice John Marshall Harlan, a man often called the Great Dissenter. Roberts pointed to a specific section of Harlan's dissent in Plessy v. Ferguson in 1896 as a separate but equal case. Harlan wrote, quote, "Our Constitution is colorblind and neither knows nor tolerates classes among citizens." And in part, for that reason, the court found affirmative action in violation of the 14th Amendment's Equal Protection Clause. But that Roberts' majority opinion happened to skip this part of Harlan's 1896 dissent. Right before the colorblind Constitution sentence, Harlan writes, quote, "The white race deems itself to be the dominant race in this country, and so it is in prestige, in achievements, in education, in wealth, and in power. So I doubt not it will continue to be for all time if it remains true to its great heritage and holds fast to the principles of constitutional liberty." A colorblind constitution on one hand and a, quote, dominant race on the other. Two diametrically opposed concepts on the same page. So this contradiction was actually laid bare in a new Atlantic piece co-authored by Ibram X. Kendi, author of How to Raise an Anti-Racist and founder of Boston University's Center for Anti-Racist Research. Dr. Kendi writes, quote, "The colorblind often see their color as superior, as Harlan did. In the actual world, an equal protection clause in a constitution can be transfigured by legal fantasy, yet again to protect racial inequity. History repeats sometimes without rhyming. Race neutral is the new separate but equal. Then the fantasy was that separate facilities for education afforded to the races were equal and that actions to desegregate them were unnecessary, if not harmful. Today, the fantasy is that regular college admissions metrics are race neutral and that affirmative action is unnecessary, if not harmful. Now that racial neutrality is the doctrine of the land, as separate but equal was a century ago, we need a new legal movement to expose its fantastical nature." Well, joining us now is Dr. Ibram X. Kendi, professor and founding director of the Center for Anti-Racist Research at Boston University. Dr. Kendi, thank you so much for being here. And I appreciate you writing that piece, because I was trying to make this case to my team over the weekend, and they were like, I don't know. I said, well, somebody gonna write it. And you definitely did. Black and Latino students, they are still underrepresented in many of our country's most selective public universities. But the Supreme Court believes that we are ready for a race-neutral or even a colorblind approach to admissions that excludes affirmative action. You call this a legal fantasy in The Atlantic. Why is it a legal fantasy?
I think it's best to contextualize it how it was a century ago, in which you had those litigants who were trying to desegregate schools, who were going up to the Supreme Court, and that Supreme Court was telling them that these schools were separate but equal, even though study after study showed that Black schools receiving far and away less resources from states like Mississippi and Georgia and South Carolina than segregated white schools. But similarly today, you have Supreme Court justices claiming that the only race-based admissions factor is affirmative action. But as you've already talked about, if you look at legacies, that provides racial preferences for white students. The same thing with, for instance, children of employees. White people are overrepresented on the staff and faculty of colleges and universities. So that gives preferences to their children. It also includes white people are more likely to donate to these institutions, and the relatives of donors also get a boost in admissions. Even standardized tests, which primarily show the wealth or the income of the parents of the test takers. And we have a massive racial wealth gap. So to me, it's a fantasy that we have race neutrality other than affirmative action, just like it was a fantasy a century ago that the schools were separate but equal.
So you write that we need a new legal movement to expose race neutrality as a fantasy. What is the new legal movement?
Well, I think it starts with your previous guest, who is actually demonstrating that legacy is actually not quote race neutral, that it actually gives preferences to white students. And we start to look at some of the other admissions factors to demonstrate that they are leading to racial inequities and disparities. And I think that's what we have to show. We have to demonstrate the outcome of these policies and be less focused on whether they have racial language or even the intent of the policymaker.
Well, you talk about the outcome. In California and in Michigan, affirmative action was already outlawed for their public universities in the 90s and in the early 2000s, actually. So Black enrollment at top schools in those two states, they plummeted. It was rapidly. I believe it was about 50%. So let's talk a little bit about the broad, long-term consequences of that kind of drastic drop in representation of students of color in these institutions.
Well, when Black, Latino, and Indigenous students are underrepresented, as they are at the top 100 most selective institutions, that also extends into the graduate programs. Then they become underrepresented in the graduate programs. And whoever's underrepresented in the graduate programs are also likely to be underrepresented in the professions, like doctors, and lawyers, or even on the Supreme Court. And so it sort of filters throughout society when Black and Brown and Indigenous students are being excluded from college admissions because of the admissions factors. It's going to then lead to other elements of society.
In the affirmative action ruling, the Supreme Court made a carve-out, an exception, if you will, for military academies. In her dissent, Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson writes that the majority decided affirmative action was fine if it meant preparing, quote, underrepresented minorities for success in the bunker, not the boardroom. What do you make of this exception?
I mean, it just goes to show where particularly Black people and other groups of color are accepted. So we're accepted when we're putting our lives on the line for the United States. We're accepted when we're entertaining people. We're accepted when we're serving people. But for whatever reason, we're not accepted when we're trying to be professionals, and build wealth like other groups.
It really strikes me that we are having this entire conversation. The Supreme Court is taking these actions that they have taken in the wake of an attack on teaching our nation's history. In schools all across the country, there's been a concerted look at critical race theory, and I'm using quotes because not actually what is happening in schools across the country. Books are being banned. In the summer that George Floyd was murdered, it really seemed like everyone was your book was flying off the shelf. Everybody's trying to figure out how to be an anti-racist. Companies were hiring DEI, opening up DEI initiatives. There were a lot of diversity dollars, as I like to call it. But 3 years later, many of those initiatives have dried up. Your books, for example, have been banned in several states, actually. And now the Supreme Court thinks we have achieved colorblindness. You've got Republican politicians celebrating it. What is happening here? And are you surprised by how far the pendulum has swung in such short amount of time?
I think taking the long view of history, I'm not surprised because when we look at American history, whenever we have achieved or sought to achieve equity, whenever we have put in place anti-racist policies like affirmative action that have been proven to close racial disparities, in colleges and universities, the typical response historically, like currently, has been that these policies are actually the problem, that these policies are somehow anti-white. And so you've had this pretty concerted movement to transform anti-racism as the real racism. And that's precisely what Jim Crow segregationists did. You had enslavers casting abolitionists as the problem. And unfortunately, that's still the case today.
It is Tuesday, the 4th of July of 2023, and you are in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. I am your chef de cuisine, Justice Putnam. Gunner, the English Bulldog, is our snoozing sous chef. Precious, the little Yorkie, is our door girl, and she will be seating you directly for our especially special daily special, Tarrytown Chowder Tuesdays on the 4th of July. Don't you feel independent? Yeah, I feel independent of most of the rights that have been ripped away from us, right out of our hearts and souls. God, I don't know. What is it up with these people? They just want to take, and all we want to do is can't we all just get along? Apparently not. There's always going to be somebody who says, no, your equality means I'm less equal. How is that? Because I want to dominate. And if I can't dominate, I'm not superior. Exactly. You can't dominate because you are not superior. Get it? You are equal, but you're not superior. On the other hand, we've had a long history of adjudication by Supreme Court that actually, we can't be colorblind, but at the same time, the white race is the superior race, and it always will be, so come on. What's the argument here, huh? What is the argument? All right, well, they keep ripping all these rights away from us, and now we're going to celebrate Independence Day from those rights. We're independent of them. Good luck. Back to the time of the warlord. Yes, let's all build walls around ourselves. Oh my God. Yeah. Actually, I've mentioned this before. I know if it's old hat, but still. Part of our whole idea of urban and rural planning as well, because let's be real. What made America so unique is that we didn't close ourselves off to the street. We opened our front porches to the street, to the public square, because that's where we were. We were citizens and choosing our own form of government. I guess they're trying to force us into believing we're choosing fascism as our form of government, which means we have absolutely no control over our own destinies, personal or spiritual. Jesus. And I don't mean that as a pun either, Jesus. Oh, gosh. Everything's rife with it, isn't it? So therefore we must dominate. I get so tired of it. I don't know. I mean, is it dominating to, tackle someone on the football field? I don't know. It seemed like a game. Within the confines of this stage, your behavior was a little bit different. Only later did I see it as maybe a microcosm of what goes on in the society as a whole. I don't know about you, but I was always offended by professional wrestling. Even though my grandfather was a professional wrestler back in the day of the golden age of the strongman, actually. He was a strongman and a wrestler. But that's how he made his money initially, and then got into buying land and then selling it too. So he made more money doing that, but he got the leg up to be able to get some property so that he could start doing what he wanted to do. And that was to grow roses. And he did. He had a giant rose concern here in Oregon. Anyway, I was always offended by professional wrestling because of this two-dimensional Punch and Judy morality play that went on. It was so boring. Jeez. If I'm going to have a cartoon, I want some superheroes like the Fantastic Four and the Avengers. And jeez, even Spider-Man. He was kind of a messed up little kid, though. I recognized it then. He was supposed to be us? Jeez. Well, maybe he was. All I know is that I tried to be Spider-Man doing backflips off the roof of our garage, for instance. Don't do that, kids. Especially not on the concrete. Don't do that. So, yeah. This morality play in professional wrestling then morphed into, well, maybe it always had a jingoistic little flavor to it. But I was always offended by professional wrestling, and apparently that is like, one of the great things that people like about politics is that it's like professional wrestling. I hear that so often from people who have never been involved in politics, never cared about it until Trump spoke to them. And what did he speak to them? It was okay to be a bigot. The reason you feel so bad about yourself are those people out there that we enslaved for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years, and now they're getting all uppity saying they want to be equal to us. We are the master race. And every single person who helps them is subhuman like them. All right. Hey, Moms for Liberty have now pushed it so that they're banning the classics. Why? Because of all the sex. Madame Bovary. Well, of course there's a lot of sex in Madame Bovary. But show me where there's the sex in Madame Bovary. They talk about it. It's because Madame Bovary was, a woman of, shall we say, working virtues. Can't have that. Because maybe I might expose what those moms are doing, because I've been telling everybody, I bet you every single one of these Nazi Frauen, Moms for Liberty, is a reverse cowboy dom. I'm serious. I bet it is. I kid you not. I don't want to know anything about the kink these ladies are involved in because I can speculate, and I bet my speculation is pretty darn correct. Jesus. Gonna have to call it reverse Nazi. Dominatrix. A reverse Nazi dominatrix. That's what they are. Moms for Liberty. Banning the classics. I did make mention that they're going to ban botany texts next because of all the flower sex. You mean bees are fondling a flower, then flitting to another one and fondling that flower? I want my children to know that. Oh no, it's so icky. And then they're all into reverse Nazi dominatrix sex. I'll tell you what's icky. Reverse Nazi dominatrix sex. Jesus Christ. In a circle of those stupid Nazi eagles, too. With black candles. Because you gotta have black candles if you're gonna have some, like, you know, kinky sex. White candles don't make it. Okay? It's the black candles. That's why I never believed Fleetwood Mac had kinky sex, because they had white candles all the time. White. Get rid of those. Black candles. Now that's what makes America great. Okay, happy Independence Day. Say goodbye to your rights. You're independent of them now. The court said so. What do we have in store for you here on this fine 4th of July? Hey, we're here. All right. We promised and we fulfill our promises. Plus, to be honest with you, it's really quiet now at this time of day because it's rather early here on the West Coast. And why not? Not having a big to-do. It's going to be big enough to do. There's going to be people, in spite of the fact, oh, this is a great argument. Because we had such great rains, we don't have to worry about fires. Not knowing anything about how wildland works. Because, yeah, we got a lot of grass that grew up during all those rains, and now they've dried out in 102, 108 degree weather. Thanks, buddy. So, yeah, but they're still going to set off their aerial illegal fireworks to put it in all of our faces because we're woke liberals who want to keep the environment safe. No, I want to keep my house from burning down, you stoop. Is there any stand your ground for that? Dare I? All right. What do we have in store for you on this 4th of July? Yes, at the top, we need to be aware that this new color blindness, like all of the color blindness argument throughout all of history, is the new separate but equal. And we know what that means. On the rest of the menu, a federal judge blocked portions of Florida's new elections law. That's a good sign, but just portions. 10 states plan to sue the EPA over standards for residential wood-burning stoves. You know, particulate matter is particulate matter. And now they're taking our wood stoves away. No, we want them to be regulated so they don't put out so much particulate matter. Give me a break. And New Jersey's other wind farm developer wants government breaks too. Everybody wants a government handout. And then they'll say that they're Nazi Republicans and get rid of all the people who are trying to steal our money. Yeah, I know what you mean by steal our money. Yours. After the break, we move to the chef's table where Hong Kong police offered rewards for the arrests of 8 pro-democracy activists who live abroad. And apparently, because they think they're still part of Interpol, they can just have a little red card, a red envelope, red card, a red flag. The little thing that Interpol uses to go out and arrest people no matter where they are. Like that's going to work. Anyway, good luck with that. And Vietnam banned the Barbie movie due to an illustration showing China's territorial claim in the South China Sea. Yeah, China built a giant man-made island. This is now China. And Vietnam says, I think that's still part of us. All that and more on West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit. Bottom of our homepage at netrootsradio.com. To the right of the page is the chat room link, and the chat room is monitored by Kelly Lincoln, who will be attending Netroots Nation in Chicago, where they got actually flooded out very badly to the point that a NASCAR race had to be canceled. NASCAR! Well, you know what they say. Whatever floats your boat. If you would then look across the page to the left from that chat room link, and we'll forget about the stupid jokes, or can we? Can we ever? To the left of the chat room link and down just a skosh is the link to our Patreon page. And if you could become a recurring Patreon of Netroots Radio, it would be really helpful. And I'm not going to go into the big spiel on the 4th of July, just the little spiel. And that is, if you could afford to send us what you might spend on an espresso-type coffee drink once a month, it does help us pay our bills. And all the other surprising costs that happen to pop up in the most inopportune times, because that's what surprising costs are. Anyway, thank you for helping us survive it after all these years, because it's been over a dozen now. And we're not going to give up, because apparently rust never sleeps, and the corrosive elements of our world are still hard at work being corrosive. And we're going to smooth things out as well as we can, and we have you to thank for allowing us to fulfill, let me rephrase that, fulfill our civic duty as the founders originally intended so many, many years ago. And it was a long time, too. If you would like to follow Netroots Radio on Twitter while we're still there, because we're bugging out, thanks, Tom, for doing that. But we're also on Mastodon and Spoutable. So follow the station there, and Tom takes care of that, as I mentioned. Thanks, Tom. Follow me on Twitter, Mastodon, and Spoutable. I looked at Spill. We'll see what's going on there. But regardless, follow me on those social media platforms, because for one reason, I post the show notes and links diary on Daily Co's 10 minutes before showtime. That's just automatic. I can queue it up and it goes right on through. But you can always find all the show notes and links and all the links to the clips that we've played there at those diaries. And you can find those diaries by going to my social media feed. So do it. You can also follow the show on Twitter, and I'm always mention such as it is, because I apologize. I don't get there to update as much. But regardless, we're there at Cookbook West. I have to think about, what is that address again? Cookbook West. And most importantly, if you could pick up podcasts by way of Spreaker, not Stitcher now. TuneIn, iHeart, YouTube, iTunes, etc., 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 but not Stitcher, apparently. Thanks, Sirius XM. Boy, they became a juggernaut. And I don't know, maybe for a reason. Anyway, find us, get our podcasts, like us, do whatever it is that they want you to do, and let's stop this fascist takeover of the world together. Thank you. All right. This first offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy on the 4th of July, Tarrytown Chowder Tuesdays. A small scant dash, a mere pinch of hot smoked Hungarian paprika made all the difference in the world, you know. Put that in the chowder, you're set. All right. Holiday staff at the Associated Press brings us this first offering in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. A federal judge yesterday, Monday, blocked Florida from enforcing part of a new elections law that bans non-citizens from handling or collecting voter registration forms, saying the state cannot restrict individual rights and gave no proof it was necessary to do so. The ruling also blocks a ban on third-party voter registration groups retaining personal info collected when registering new voters. You know, they have voter lists that they just go and tap all the time, but we're not allowed to. The NAACP and other groups that register voters sued the state over provisions in a larger elections bill that DeSantis signed on the same day he announced he was running for president. Opponents say it makes registering voters in marginalized communities more difficult, while Republicans said they were making elections more secure. Yeah, secure from all those marginalized groups who will definitely be voting against their draconian, Nazi, bigoted, racist, misogynistic, homophobic laws. And basically for being really bad people. Holiday staff, or maybe it's the same ones, bring us this next offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy on this Tarrytown Chowder 4th of July Tuesdays. Attorneys general from 10 states plan to sue the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, saying its failure to review and ensure emission standards for wood-burning stoves has allowed the continued sale of appliances that could worsen pollution. That means programs that encourage people to trade in older stoves and other wood-burning appliances, such as forced air furnaces, haven't necessarily improved air quality, the states say. If newer wood heaters do not meet cleaner standards, then programs to change out old wood heaters may provide little health benefits at significant public cost, the states wrote in a 60-day notice of intent to sue. The states involved are Alaska, Illinois, Maryland, Massachusetts, Minnesota, New Jersey, New York, Oregon, Vermont, and Washington, as well as the Puget Sound Clean Air Agency. They allege that the EPA's current standards are not good enough, and that even if they were, the agency's testing and certification program is so ineffective that it has failed to ensure those standards. The EPA's Office of Inspector General, in a report released in February, found the EPA's 2015 performance standards for residential wood heaters was flawed and said the agency has approved methods that lack clarity and allow too much flexibility. As a result, certification tests may not be accurate, do not reflect real-world conditions, and may result in some wood heaters being certified for sale that emit too much particulate matter pollution, the report said. The agency supports programs aimed at replacing older, dirtier wood heaters with newer, cleaner models and distributed about $82 million in grants for residential exchanges between the fiscal years of 2015 and 2021. However, the report stated, if the replacement models do not meet emission standards because of the reasons described above, millions of federal, state, and local dollars could be wasted. EPA officials, in response to a draft of the report, said they take the concern seriously and would continue to take steps to address testing and certification issues. Holiday worker bees at the Associated Press continue to bring us these offerings here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. A company approved to build New Jersey's third offshore wind farm says it too wants government financial incentives, saying its project and the jobs it would create are at risk without the additional help. Atlantic Shores issued a statement shortly after New Jersey lawmakers approved a tax break for Danish wind developer Ørsted, which has approval to build 2 wind farms off the state's coast. Elaborating, the Atlantic City-based Atlantic Shores said it has contacted the offices of New Jersey Governor Phil Murphy and leaders of the state Senate and Assembly, saying it seeks a solution that stabilizes all awarded projects. It remains to be seen how the request will be received by lawmakers. The tax bill passed by a single vote. Atlantic Shores did not precisely say what sort of assistance it wants, and refused to publicly clarify its request or discuss the likelihood of being able to complete the project with its current financing. The tax break approved by lawmakers only applies to Ocean Wind 1, the first of Ørsted's 2 New Jersey projects. It also does not apply to Atlantic Shores. The company did not explicitly say it cannot build and operate its project without further financial aid, but it did hint that the outcome is possible without immediate action. Atlantic Shores is a joint partnership between Shell New Energies US LLC and EDF RE, must be for real estate, Offshore Development LLC. That way no one can know who's actually behind it. No one's held responsible for everybody else's malfeasance. The company said that while the bill approved, which waits action by the governor, will help its manufacturing partner, EEW American Offshore Structures, I think that would be known as American Offshore Structures, build the large monopolies that will support Atlantic Shores wind turbines. Oh, I'm sorry. Monopiles. They're going to build the large monopiles, which will then hold up the big wind turbine, not the monopolies. Sorry about that. We need immediate action that also supports the Atlantic Shores Project 1 to keep these commitments within reach, Atlantic Shores said. The governor's office declined to comment, and state, Senate, and Assembly political leadership did not immediately respond to requests for comment yesterday, Monday, because everybody's gone away to go home and celebrate the loss of their rights on the 4th of July. Lawmakers said the Ørsted bill was necessary to help offshore wind projects deal with what they called lingering effects of inflation and the COVID-19 pandemic. And I suppose, they know about wind projects out there in the, up in Denmark, and everywhere else along the North Sea. The vote went largely along party lines, with Democrats, who hold the governorship and control both houses of the legislature, supporting it as necessary to ensure that a source of green energy gets built. Republicans panned it, of course, as a wasteful gift to companies whose projects are not economically viable without further cost to ratepayers. Atlantic Shores said it is competing against other states and major economies, all vying to build offshore wind projects. New Jersey energy regulators approved Atlantic Shore's 1,510-megawatt project in 2021. It would generate enough electricity to power 637,000 homes. And that's not just a trifling amount. All right, let us now go to our break, and when we get back from that break, we will go through weather from around the world on the 4th of July. And we will finish up with the stories that we've curated for you today. You are listening to West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, and we will be right back.
You are listening to netrootsradio.com.
Please hang up and try again.
From a point at sea to the circles of your mind, a new force is at work for planetary transformation. New radio for a new Earth.
This is Science Quickly, a podcast from Scientific American. I'm Stefano Montali. If I asked you to visualize, say, Harry Potter, you'd probably have no problem picturing him in your mind. A teenage wizard with black hair, glasses, a thunderbolt-shaped scar on his forehead, and a wand in his hand. It would almost be as if you were pulling up a photograph in your head. This ability to visualize is often called the mind's eye, and most people would say it's as inherent as breathing. But it turns out that's not quite true. Estimates say about 1% of the population live with an extreme form of a condition called aphantasia. Those who have it can't visualize anything in their head.
So when they try and imagine and think about what an apple looks like, it's just nothing. It's black on black. For example, when I think about an apple, I can capture a conscious experience of an apple. I can see the stem, I can see a leaf, I can see a drop of water on there. It's not like holding an apple in my hand, but I have an experience of an apple.
Joel Pearson is a professor of cognitive neuroscience and director of the Future Minds Lab at the University of New South Wales in Australia. He's been studying mental imagery, including in the context of aphantasia and cognition, since 2008. One of the main questions, he says, has always been finding a way to accurately measure it.
Back then, almost no one, there was only a few people studying visual imagery because it was so hard to measure, right? It was just questionnaires and maybe an interview. The problem with questionnaires is that you and me could both imagine an apple and our imagery could be exactly the same, but I might rate it a 4 and you might rate it a 1, right? Even though we consciously, internally experience the exact same thing, or vice versa. Maybe we have totally different imagery and both rate it as 2. So that's kind of the inherent problem of metacognition when it comes to questionnaires. So a lot of what we do at Future Minds Lab is trying to develop new ways of measuring the mind, objective, reliable ways, like a microscope for the mind or a blood test to measure the mind.
One of the lab's experiments explored how a lack of mental imagery affects the way people with aphantasia respond in a hypothetical stressful situation.
We did another experiment, which was having people come into a dark room and read these scary stories on the screen. We found that people with imagery, when we measure their skin conductance response, get this nice escalating response during the story. Those with aphantasia get sort of a flatlining, bumpy. Whereas if we show both those group scary images on the screen, both groups go up. So when it's perceptual, no real difference. When it's words on the screen, a role for mental imagery, is a clear difference.
Building on this research, Pearson and his team then recruited people with aphantasia from the Sydney, Australia area to come to the lab for another experiment. This time, he asked the participants to imagine a dark object and then a light one.
Your pupil contracts when you're imagining the bright thing, just like it does if I look up at the light. People with imagery, pupils different in the light condition, no imagery with aphantasia. There's no real difference there.
For a person to be able to volunteer for this type of experiment, they first have to realize that they have aphantasia. But how do you know that you can't visualize if you don't even know that other people can? Quite often, Pearson says the epiphany takes place in a meditation class.
The teacher will be saying, now picture this and picture that, and I'll be getting more and more frustrated saying, they keep saying that. What do they mean? I can't picture that. I compare it to people discovering they're colorblind. They just don't know what they're missing until someone describes somehow the vivid experience of color. Then they go, oh, wait, what?
On a brighter note, though, there are many successful creative people that live with the condition. Pixar co-founder Ed Catmull is one. Glenn Keane, a character animator behind films such as The Little Mermaid and Beauty and the Beast, is another. So is there a connection between imagery, aphantasia, and creativity?
I had lots of emails from people saying, oh my God, I've realized I have aphantasia. That's why I'm not creative. In fact, we're running a creativity study now here in Future Minds. And again, the data does not support any difference in creativity measures for those with aphantasia. So even though people tend to sort of have some intuition, they think that there should be a lack of creativity in aphantasia, the data just doesn't support that so far.
Living without mental imagery might seem like a disadvantage, but Pearson says there are benefits as well, especially in terms of those living with anxiety disorders such as post-traumatic stress disorder or PTSD.
All the data we have so far suggests that the more vivid your imagery is, the more prone you are to develop PTSD after a trauma. Things around anxiety are going to be different and less without imagery.
But what about good memories? Do they stick around? Pearson says yes, just in a bit of a different way.
That can take on a number of different semantics, ideas, concepts, spatial locations, emotions, and sometimes different senses. You can break aphantasia up into multisensory aphantasia, so it's blind across all the senses, or pure visual aphantasia. So why people's lifelong memories have less details if they have aphantasia, they're still there. It's not catastrophic. The memories aren't lost.
Thanks for listening. For Scientific Americans, Science Quickly, I'm Stefano Montali.
Hi, it's Tom. Could we humbly suggest your donation to netrootsradio.com? All we've got to run this 24-hour powerhouse of progressive resistance radio is what comes out of our own wallets. And you are our biggest donor. It doesn't take much, $3, $5. Just go to the bottom of our netrootsradio.com page and hit our secure donate button. Heck, you can even make a recurring contribution. So donate what you'd like at the bottom of our netrootsradio.com's homepage. Because you are our biggest donor. netrootsradio.com. Together, we are Resistance Radio.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. Do you consider the right to join and form a union of your choosing a fundamental right? The United Nations does. And on this day in labor history, the year was 1950. On that day, the United Nations formally put into force the freedom of association and protection of the right to organize. After World War II, the United Nations sought to outline the principles that it hoped would build a more just, safe, and equitable world. The International Labor Organization played a key role in that process through its affiliation with the United Nations. It was the first specialized organization to be recognized as part of the United Nations. After their convention in 1948, the International Labor Organization affirmed their commitment to workers' rights. That same year, the United Nations supported these principles as part of their Universal Declaration of Human Rights. This Declaration for Workers' Rights would become official 12 months after ratification by two nations. Norway and Sweden were those first two countries to do so. And today in labor history, this important international declaration went into full force. The United Nations Declaration read, "Everyone has the right to freedom of peaceful assembly and association." It went on to even more specifically guarantee workers' rights, stating clearly, everyone has the right to form and to join trade unions for the protection of his interests. Today, the International Labor Organization continues to coordinate international efforts to address child labor, the plight of migrant workers, and many more issues of workplace health and safety. It is one of the main collectors of international labor statistics around the world. We should all be dedicated to this simple truth. Union rights are human rights.
Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show.
Thank you for accompanying us here to the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Tarrytown Chowder Tuesdays on the 4th of July. We always begin weather from around the world along the banks of the Rogue River in the Rogue River Valley of Southern Oregon on the west coast of the continental United States of America, where it is currently 64 degrees Fahrenheit, expecting record high temperatures near 101, which means more like 105 or hotter here at the mothership. Winds will be out of the north-northwest at 5 to 10 miles per hour, which is nice, because when you spritz yourself with some water, that wind actually makes it feel cooler. Try it. Clear skies overnight with lows in the low to mid 60s, not nearly cool enough for my liking. Winds will be out of the northwest at 5 to 10 miles per hour. And then mainly sunny skies tomorrow with near record high temperatures again between 101 and 105. Winds out of the northwest at 5 to 10 miles per hour. Grass pollen is rated high here in our little town of Rogue River. The air quality index for the region is in the good range at 20 parts per million. And that daytime UV index remains very high at level 9. Barometric pressure is falling at 29.96 inches. Visibility is up to 9 miles, and relative humidity is at 60%. Weather from around the world is brought to you by a crowd of crowdsourced weather stations that a crowd crowdsources from around the world. London is 60 degrees with rain. Paris is 68 degrees with rain showers and a thunderstorm warning. Rome is 86 and sunny. Kyiv is 86 and partly cloudy. Kabul is 75 and clear. Hong Kong is 85 and partly cloudy. Tokyo is 75 and partly cloudy. Sydney, Australia is 50 degrees and partly cloudy. San Francisco, California is 56 and cloudy. And New York is 77 degrees Fahrenheit, thunder, and you are under an active flood watch. So do take care. And that is weather from around the world, brought to you by a crowd of crowdsourced weather stations that a crowd crowdsources from around the world. Present holiday staff at the Associated Press brings us this first amuse-bouche here at the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Tarrytown Chowder Tuesdays on the 4th of July. Hong Kong police yesterday, Monday, accused 8 self-exiled pro-democracy activists of violating the territory's harsh national security law and offered rewards of 1 million Hong Kong dollars, the equivalent of $127,600 US, each for information leading to their arrests. So you could get almost $130,000 on each of them. The U.S. and Britain strongly condemn the move. If you turn them in, you are scum. The rewards are the first for suspects accused of violating the Beijing-imposed legislation since it took effect in June of 2020. It outlaws subversion, secession, collusion with foreign forces, and terrorism. The 8 activists are former pro-democracy lawmakers Nathan Law, Ted Wei, and Dennis Kwok, lawyer Kevin Yam, unionist Meng Su Tat, and activist Fin Lau, Anna Kwok, and Elmer Yuen. Police announced at a news conference they are currently living in the U.S., Britain, Canada, and Australia after some were earlier accused of various other offenses. Stephen Lee, chief superintendent of the police's National Security Department, said arrest warrants have been issued for the 8 under the national security law. He had acknowledged that police will not be able to arrest them if they remain overseas, but urged them to return to Hong Kong and surrender for a reduction in their sentences. Yeah, that's right. Lee said the new charges and rewards are not intended to spread fear, but are merely enforcing the law and making him fear that they're going to be enforcing the law, the long arm of Hong Kong law. He cited articles of the security law which state the police have extraterritorial jurisdiction and said they would pursue people overseas who endanger Hong Kong's national security. Well, how about me? The news conference came less than 2 weeks after the state-owned Tung Kang Pao newspaper issued an editorial stating that the national security law applies to people outside Hong Kong and that China, as a member of Interpol, could request assistance from other countries in arresting fugitives.
Je te donne, c'est mon amour pour la vie entière. La promesse de me trouver à tes genoux. Aussitôt que tu m'appelles, rester toujours fidèle. C'est tout, c'est tout. Je te donne tous mes printemps, mes étés de mer. Mes automnes, quand les feuilles tombent partout. Si ce n'est pas une bonne affaire, je te donne tous mes hivers.
Associated Press holiday staff brings us this final amuse-bouche here at the Chef's Table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Vietnam state media have reported that the government banned distribution of the popular Barbie movie because it includes a view of a map showing disputed Chinese territorial claims in the South China Sea. The newspaper, Vietnam Express, and other media said posters advertising Barbie were removed from movie distributors' websites after Monday's decision yesterday, with Margot Robbie playing Barbie opposite Ryan Gosling's Ken in Greta Gerwig's comedic look at their perfect world. Barbie was supposed to open July 21st in Vietnamese theaters. The report cited V. Kien Ton, Director General of the Vietnam Cinema Department, as saying the National Film Evaluation Council made the decision. It said a map in the film shows China's, quote, 9-dash line, end quote, which extends Beijing's territorial claims far into waters that fall within areas claimed by Vietnam and other countries. The 9-dash line is an arcane but sensitive issue for China and its neighbors that shows Beijing's maritime border extending into areas claimed by other governments and encompasses most of the South China Sea. That has brought it into tense standoffs with the ASEAN nations of Indonesia, Vietnam, Malaysia, Brunei, and the Philippines, with Chinese fishing boats and military vessels becoming more aggressive in the disputed waters. China is exceedingly sensitive when it comes to how its national image and border claims are portrayed in entertainment and by business. Companies almost always acquiesce to Chinese complaints, fearing they risk being locked out of the huge lucrative Chinese market. That includes Hollywood films deleting or adding scenes based on the expected response of the ruling Communist Party and the highly nationalistic public. When an international court ruled in 2016 that the 9-dash line has no basis in law and the Philippines was entitled to an exclusive economic zone in part of the area claimed by Beijing, China rejected the ruling. Of course they would. Well, that brings us to the end of our broadcast period for the day, but you do know Netroots Radio broadcasts on, and we will meet up here tomorrow for Smothered Benedict Wednesdays. So do stay tuned to Netroots Radio all day and all night for all the breaking news as it breaks, and we will meet up here tomorrow, right here in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théâtres, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. À fleurs sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte Goël. Je voudrais toujours te plaire dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je veux déjeuner par terre, comme au long de golfe clair. T'embrasser les yeux ouverts dans mon jardin d'hiver. Pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver.